Thank you, Professor Koh in US, Tembusu College. Thank you so much for having us. Just like in real life, one of the reasons we were late today is Ross and I were, before we arrived, we were trying to reach some bipartisan compromise on some key issues, and it took a long time. And ultimately, we have not come to agreement yet, but I think we're close. And then as our meeting was ending, it started to rain. So that's just kind of like real life. So apologies, but it's kind of reflective of the situation today. I think, you know, we know that Obama's policies and Romney's policies, there's quite a bit of difference between the policies. But one way to understand these policies and think about them, I think, is always to understand the context, where they came from. What's the stage that these policies were crafted from, that they came from. And I think there's two main points that I would like to say about President Obama's policies. One is it's a very personal thing. It's a personal thing in the sense of how do you relate to other people. And what I mean by that is that Governor Romney and President Obama have come from very, very different backgrounds. Very different family backgrounds, very different socioeconomic backgrounds, different class backgrounds. It's almost black and white, if I can use a kind of a bad analogy. But there's something to that. That really shows and tells you a lot about a person. Obviously, both of us have worked very hard for our success, but you really have to think about a person's background, how they act, how they talk about other people, other Americans, other countries. This is really key, I think, for what I believe in, for what the Democratic Party believes in, and I think there's a big difference between the two parties here. The other thing is, you know, aside from socioeconomic background and human philosophy or human interaction viewpoint is, you know, some people, we would hope that people learn from their mistakes. No one's perfect. They try something. They try it for a while, maybe even 2 terms, which in American politics is 8 years. And if it's usually pretty clear if something worked or not. And in this case, I think the Republicans had 8 years at it, and I think no one can dispute where it's led us. So, you know, the second key point I want to talk about is, in context for policies, is let's not do things that have failed. That's a fundamental principle. Let's try different things and new things. So, you know, my policies or the party's policies are rooted in moving away from the failed policies of the past and moving forward to build an economy of the future, not an economy of the past. So just a little bit into some of the specific policies, I think, that are key differentiators between us. As we know, when I came on office, when President Obama came into office, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month, which was astronomical. Bailouts of Wall Street, you know, it was panic time, okay? So one of the things that my administration did was, look, we've got to do something about Wall Street. Banks cannot be too big to fail. And if they fail, the shareholders have to bear the loss, not the government. We don't want to ever do this again. So we had Wall Street reform, the Dodd-Frank Act, consumer protections, and no more bank casinos, where the bankers take the winnings and taxpayers pick up the losses. So I can't just make a law. It had to be passed through Congress. So in Congress, the Republican strategy was to water down the protections. In an attempt to compromise and be bipartisan, you know, the Democrats said, okay, you know, that makes sense. Let's change it to this way to accommodate you. How many votes did we get from Republicans? I don't know the vote count, but I would guess it could be counted on one hand, if that. So almost complete opposition to Wall Street reform. And here's the thing, with no alternative. Not, oh, well, what about this plan? It's just a no. To me, that's irresponsible. It shows a viewpoint on policy making. To me, it was quite shocking to water down, and then not get any votes and not have any alternative. And not only that, but now one of the main planks of Governor Romney is to repeal Wall Street reform. To replace it with what? Oh, well, we've heard, oh, well, everyone needs some regulations. Well, where were they? Where was your plan B? There was none. This is flabbergasting, I hate to say it. I mean, it was quite surprising to me. Healthcare. In 2008, President Obama ran on a ticket of reforming healthcare and expanding coverage. He won that election and a mandate for moving forward. So, what policy options were there? Again, Democratic Party said, well, let's look at some Republican ideas. How about this, a mandate that everyone has to have insurance? Because that wasn't existing before. So it's kind of a market mechanism, and this is actually a market mechanism brought about by Republican think tanks. What better compromise position to try to reform than something that's a Republican idea? Again, during Congress, oppose, 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 oppose. They had some ideas, some other alternatives, but virtually none of those alternatives expanded coverage. None. So what's the point? Okay? And now, again, what's the plank of my running mate, not my running mate, the person running against me, is repeal Obamacare. Oh, except for the good parts. What's even more shocking to me that this was a Republican plan is that he pioneered it as a Republican governor. But now he's against it, simply because I'm a Democrat and I'm running against him. I think there's no other conclusion. Education. One of the first things the Democratic Congress did in business after the election was increase the affordability of higher education, university and college. For decades and decades and decades, student loan programs were run basically by big Wall Street banks. Even though the student loans were guaranteed by the government, the middlemen, big banks from Wall Street, they took from the students and middle-class families market rate interest rates for decades and decades, billions and billions of years, every year, out of Americans' pockets, increasing the cost of education. That had to stop, and so that's what we did. One of the first issues that happened in the Democratic Congress. We took those middle people out, reduced the affordability, made college more affordable, because that's one of the keys to a successful economy, especially an economy of the future. Research and development, smart people. We've got to increase access. Guess who voted no? Guess who opposed these policies in Congress each step of the way? Ironically, as an attack on free enterprise, an attack on the capitalist system that we're trying to take out the banks from the equation. Energy policies. There's a big difference between us on energy policies. We have to look to the future. Everyone knows that you go to the petrol station, you fill up your car with petrol. We know that you use coal and oil to generate electricity. Everyone knows that, and that's going to be the case for the next several years. But we have to think beyond that, all right? That's not going to last forever. We have to think beyond that. America is losing the race for energy technologies in the renewable area to China and Europe. We've got to be a leader there. Again, big difference. Oppose, 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 oppose. Those are just a bunch of green companies. We don't want to do that. That's wasting taxpayers' money. Well, I'll tell you something. The Democratic Party will not give up on this fight. We will always support research and development in the area of renewable technologies, renewable energy technologies. Infrastructure. The last decade, the last 5 years, who's doing well and who's not doing so well? Asia's doing very well. Very, very well. Every single Asian city you go to, the skyline is all skyscrapers, construction cranes, tunneling machines, bidding contracts on huge public infrastructure contracts. What are they building? They're building schools, they're building universities, they're building bridges, they're building power plants, airports, public transportation. Imagine that, public transportation. They're building those projects, and those are expensive. You have to have those to have a prosperous free market economy. You don't get economic growth without that infrastructure there in place. Again, I want to invest in those things. My running mate portrays that as a government takeover of the economy. I mean, what works? Just look at here in Singapore. It's a prime example of the government working hand in hand with private enterprise. You do it smart, you have great benefits. There's no question about it. Again, it's let's do things that work, not do things that fail. Finally, the deficit. This is a big issue, of course. Apparently, it's all my fault. I've been getting that memo and letters and messages on TV and during debates. It's my fault. I'm the person that's responsible for the deficit. I'm being sarcastic. But we need to fix it. No matter who did it, we need to fix it. Okay? So, who has a realistic plan to improve the deficit? There's one way to find out, and that's to use a calculator. Another way is to look at it from the viewpoint of the ratings agencies. They're the real political bosses now. They don't care about ideology. They don't care about who won the election. They care about the dollars and cents and a balance sheet. That's what they're going to be looking at. And what's your plan? Okay? My plan, roughly, is we need to do some cutting, of course. In fact, more cutting than revenue raising. My plan is about $2.50 in cuts for every $1 in revenue. Okay? The revenue comes from going back to the Clinton boom year era tax rates for what I'm calling wealthy, those American families making $250,000 and more. My running mate and all of his party, and during the primary, it was made very clear that they are not for a balanced approach. And in fact, the suggestion is that they're all for all cuts in order to balance the budget. First of all, that won't work just as a math thing, okay? That's just not going to work. During the Republican primary, the question was asked, would any of you candidates even support $1 for every $9 of cuts? $1 revenue for every $9 of cuts? No one raised their hand. No one could even support that. The ratings agencies are laughing at that. Worse than that, they're scared about that. And everyone else in America and around the world should be scared about that as well. There has to be a balance. You cannot balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, poor children, poor people, and infrastructure. You just can't do it. There has to be a balanced approach of revenues and tax increases. Thank you.